Rain hammers the November pavement like 1,000 fists, and the alley behind Marcello's Italian restaurant has become a graveyard. The neon sign above flickers red and gold, casting everything below in a fever dream of color that does not match the horror unfolding on the wet concrete. Vincent Castellano is on his knees. His $1,000 suit, tailored in Milan 3 months ago, soaks through with rainwater and something darker. His hands, the same hands that signed death warrants for 20 men, that made senators bow their heads, that built an empire on the bones of his enemies, shake like a child's as they press against the spreading crimson stain on a woman's abdomen. 3 seconds ago, she threw herself between him and a bullet meant for his chest. The assassin lies 15 feet away, his body crumpled like discarded paper, 2 bullets through his skull courtesy of Rocco and Nino, who stand frozen with guns still drawn, their minds trying to catch up to what their eyes have witnessed. In 15 years of service, they have never seen their boss like this. Never seen him kneel. Never seen him tremble. Aria Wells' eyes flutter open. Her delivery uniform, the one with the faded Marchello's logo on the front, the one she has worn for 6 months while collecting barely enough in tips to buy her son's insulin, is soaked through. The $200 in her pocket, every penny she has left in the world after paying this month's rent, turns to pulp in her jean pocket. Her fingers grasp at the rain-slicked pavement, searching for purchase, finding none. Her lips move. The sound barely escapes. "Oliver," she whispers. 10 days. 22,000. Vincent leans closer, his ear near her mouth, the rain streaming down his face mingling with something that might be tears. He does not know her name. She does not know his. She doesn't know that the man she just saved controls every street corner in Chicago, every warehouse, every transaction worth more than her life was ever valued at. But what she could not have known was that Vincent Castellano had been watching her for 3 months. "Get the car," Vincent's voice cracks, a sound no one in this city has ever heard, and the crack terrifies Rocco and Nino more than any scream could. "Call Moretti. Tell him we need surgery. Now. Tell him she dies and this entire city burns." The metallic smell of blood mixes with rain and the charred garlic drifting from the kitchen vents. Aria's breathing slows. Her eyes lose focus. Vincent presses his hand harder against her wound, as if his will alone can stop the bleeding, as if the same authority that makes grown men weep can negotiate with death itself. "You do not get to close your eyes," he commands, his voice steady now, that dangerous calm returning. "You hear me? You stay awake. You stay here with me." The sirens arrive in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Rocco counts every one of them. 3 months earlier, everything was different. Vincent Castellano sat in his private booth at Marcello's, the one hidden behind a rosewood screen carved with the face of a saint no one could identify anymore, and he watched a waitress he did not know protect a man she had never met. The kitchen. 7:43 p.m. A Tuesday. 2 of his men, young, stupid, the kind who mistake cruelty for strength, had cornered an elderly regular named Paul, a retired accountant who ate at Marcello's every other week, always alone, always ordered the same thing. Paul had not paid them the protection money Vincent never asked him for, but his lieutenants extracted anyway. Vincent had ended that practice 6 months ago. His men, however, had not received the message with sufficient clarity. The woman appeared like a knife cutting through the kitchen heat. She was small. Not in a delicate way, but in the way of someone who had been erased so thoroughly by circumstance that her body had begun to shrink away from the world. Her hair, a dark brown, pulled back in a braid frayed at the edges, caught the fluorescent light. Her eyes were the color of storm-touched sky. Her uniform was stained with tomato sauce and grease. But when she stepped between Paul and the 2 men with their hands reaching for his shirt, something absolute moved through the kitchen. "He does not have it," she said, and her voice trembled like a candle in the wind, but her feet did not move. "So you're going to walk away, and you're going to tell whoever sent you that he does not have it, and you're going to disappear from this kitchen before I decide to handle this differently." One of the men laughed. A sound like glass shattering. The woman did not blink. Rocco would later tell the story 17 times, each version adding new details that terrified Vincent more than the last. The woman had no weapon. She had nothing. She was, by every measure that mattered in their world, completely helpless. And she stood there anyway. Vincent, watching from his booth, felt the first crack in the vault he had sealed 15 years ago. 15 years ago, in the dead of winter, Vincent's daughter Elena had been 8 years old. She had a room in the mansion with her name painted on the wall in her own careful handwriting, the letters crooked and proud. She collected buttons from her mother's dresses and kept them in a tin box under her bed. She asked questions about why he left every night and when he would come home, and he had promised her he would spend the next Saturday with her, just the two of them, ice cream and the botanical gardens. That Saturday, he buried her instead. An accident, they said. A fever that turned septic while he was conducting business in Atlantic City. By the time he returned, her body was already cold. The room with her name painted on the wall remained untouched. 16 years of dust collecting on the buttons in the tin box. 16 years of never entering that space, because entering it required acknowledging that some things, even for the most powerful man in the city, could not be fixed. Vincent had learned to live without grief. He had learned to live without softness. He had become a man made of stone and venom, and in 20 years, no one had tested that hardness until a widow with calloused hands and nothing to lose stepped between his men and an old man they were extorting. She had looked at fear and chosen courage anyway. Now, in the rain-soaked alley, her blood spreading across his hands like an accusation, Vincent understood what he should have learned 15 years ago. Some vaults, once cracked, cannot be sealed again. Stay with me, he whispers to a woman he does not know, who will not remember this moment, whose name he has only just learned. I have got you. You are not alone anymore. Rocco and Nino exchange a glance neither has seen cross between them in 15 years. Something has shifted. Something irreversible has torn open in the chest of the most feared man in Chicago, and both of them understand, without words, that every life in this city is now about to change. The ambulance screeches around the corner, and Vincent does not let go of her hand, even as the paramedics pull her away, even as they load her into the truck and the doors slam shut on her pale face and her closed eyes. He stands in the rain, blood drying on his expensive suit, his men standing silent beside him, and he speaks words that will echo through every street corner, every warehouse, every transaction worth more than gold. Find out who she is. Find out everything. And if she dies, if so much as a single organ fails, if she spends more than 5 minutes afraid or alone, this entire city will learn what pain really means. Rocco moves immediately. Nino follows. Neither man has questions. What was coming next, what was waiting in the shadows of her small apartment and her desperate choices and her son who needed surgery in 10 days, would remake everything Vincent thought he knew about power. But he did not know that yet. He only knew that a woman had thrown herself between him and death, and she had called out the name of her son with her blood pooling on the pavement, and something in that sound had torn away every wall he had spent 15 years constructing. Before we continue, drop a like if this story captures your heart. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to 3 months before that November night, to understand how a widow with nothing became the woman who would reshape the empire of a king. 3 months before that November night, before the rain and the blood and the choice that would reshape a city, Aria Wells stood in the kitchen of Marchello's with her hands trembling and $87 that were not hers to keep. The restaurant hummed around her, the soft clink of crystal glasses, the murmur of important men conducting important business in candlelit booths, the smell of garlic and wine reduction hanging thick in the air. She had worked the dinner rush, 5 hours on her feet in a uniform that had started the day pressed and neat and now clung to her skin with sweat and the lingering scent of rosemary. Her dark hair, once carefully pinned, had begun to fall loose around her face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes like bruises that would never quite fade. Derek Collins cornered her in the hallway between the kitchen and the dining room. He was a man built of cheap cologne and expensive suits that didn't quite fit his frame, mid-40s, his hair slicked back with something that caught the light. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough that only she could hear it, which made it infinitely worse than if he had shouted. "Your tips, Aria." She looked at him, her jaw tightening. "All of them," he continued, stepping closer, his breath sour with wine. "You're 3 hours past your shift. You know the rules. You want to stay past 9 o'clock, you work it off, or you can explain to Oliver why Mommy doesn't have a job anymore." The way he said her son's name was like a blade wrapped in ice. She opened her hand. $87. The bills were crumpled from being shoved into her apron pocket throughout the service, and she could feel each one as she placed them in Derek's waiting palm. He smiled, a thing like a scar opening. "Thank you, Aria. You're such a team player. Close out section for before you leave, would you? There's a good girl." He disappeared back into the dining room. She stood in that hallway with her empty hand still extended, staring at nothing. A busboy pushed past her with a load of dirty plates. A cook shouted something in rapid Italian from the kitchen. The noise of Marchello swallowed her whole, and she swallowed with it, letting the anger and the fear sink back down into the place where she kept all the things she could not afford to feel. She was 29 years old and she looked a decade older. Her wedding ring caught the light as she wiped her eyes, still there, still on, though her husband had been dead 8 months now. Aria Wells. Dead in a construction accident that should never have happened, that happened because the site foreman cut corners and nobody said anything, and the lawsuit had taken 2 years and settled for nothing close to what the debt had accumulated to. He had left her with debts and a son with a congenital heart condition and a job that paid minimum wage plus tips that a manager could steal whenever he felt like it. The night stretched ahead of her. Close out section 4. It was past midnight when she finally turned her key in the lock of her apartment. The place was small, 3 rooms, a kitchen that was barely more than a hallway, a bathroom with a shower that ran cold after 30 seconds, her bedroom, and Oliver's room. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors through them, hear their televisions and their arguments and their quiet moments of peace. She paid $780 a month for this space, and some nights that felt like an impossibility. She sat at her kitchen table, which was cracked along one edge from a night when Marco had thrown a glass during one of his rages, back when he was still alive and drinking away the shame of what he was becoming. The table sat under a light bulb that flickered, casting shadows that made the small space feel either very large or very small depending on her mood. Tonight it felt very small. She counted her money. $200. That was everything she had left in the world after rent, after utilities, after the bare minimum of food that she bought for Oliver and ate herself only on the nights when her hunger outweighed her fear of running out. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a strawberry, was a hospital bill. The paper had turned yellow at the edges, and red letters stamped across it read urgent in a font so large it could not be ignored. Oliver Wells, age 7. Congenital heart valve condition. Surgical intervention required before November 20th. Cost, $22,000. Estimated hospital stay, 3 to 5 days. Follow-up care, ongoing. $22,000. The number had stopped making sense to her somewhere around month 3 of receiving the bill. It was not money. It was not even a thing that existed in her world. It was a theoretical amount, the kind of number you read about in news stories about other people's tragedies. She pulled down a crumpled envelope from the top shelf of her cabinet, the place where she kept the things she could not bear to look at but could not throw away. Inside was a letter, folded and refolded so many times that the creases had begun to tear through the paper itself. Northwestern University. Office of Admissions. Dated 12 years ago. She had been 17, brilliant in the way that poor girls who work hard enough to shine can be brilliant, accepted to a university that represented every dream she had ever allowed herself to have. Scholarship pending. Start date, fall semester. She had never gone. Her mother had gotten sick that summer. Her mother, who worked 2 jobs and still could not afford the co-pays, who needed someone to take care of her, and Aria had been the only daughter old enough to do it. The scholarship had gone to someone else. The dream had compressed itself into the shape of her acceptance letter she kept in an envelope, and then she had met Marco at 22, and married him at 23, and discovered at 24 that he was the kind of man who drank too much and believed it was her fault, and then Oliver had been born, and Marco had died, and now here she was. She placed the letter back on the shelf and closed her eyes. In the next room, Oliver slept in his small bed, the frame decorated with stickers of dinosaurs and astronauts, things he loved with the innocent ferocity of a 7-year-old boy who had never learned that love was dangerous. His breathing was labored, a small whistling sound on the exhale, his chest rising and falling with effort that no child should have to expend just to stay alive. The doctors said his heart was tired. It was a strange way to describe it, as if his heart was a person who had been working too hard and needed a vacation it would never get. She kissed his forehead. His skin was warm, too warm maybe, or maybe that was just her fear talking, her fear that had become so constant it was difficult to distinguish from reality anymore. She whispered a promise into his sleeping face, the same promise she whispered every night. "I will find the money, baby. I will find it. You are going to be okay." He did not stir. His small hand, no bigger than the palm of her own, gripped the edge of his blanket the way he gripped it every night, as if he might fall if he let go. She closed the door very quietly and returned to the kitchen and sat at her cracked table and stared at the walls that were closing in on her like the mouth of some very patient animal that had decided not to rush its meal. Outside, the August night was warm and humid and ordinary. Cars passed. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. A couple argued on the street below her window, their voices rising and falling like a song she had heard 1,000 times. $22,000. 10 days. $200. The math was a wall. The math was a door that would not open. The math was the reason she would never sleep through an entire night again. What she did not know was that 3 blocks away, in the back room of Marchello's restaurant, a man was sitting alone in a leather booth, watching the rain streak down the windows, and thinking about a daughter who never got to see her 8th birthday. His name was Vincent Castellano, and he had spent the last 15 years not entering the nursery in his mansion, the one with the name painted on the wall in his daughter's own childish handwriting. He had spent 15 years convinced that he would never feel anything again, that grief was something you endured like a scar, like a permanent alteration of who you were meant to be. He did not know that his life was about to be divided into 2 distinct periods, before and after the moment when a woman with $200 to her name would stand between him and death, and call out the name of her son with blood pooling on the pavement. He only knew that the rain was falling, and that he was alone, and that somewhere in the city, someone was suffering in a way that he might have been able to prevent if he had been paying attention. But attention was a luxury he no longer afforded to the ordinary world. That would change. The November rain hammered against the kitchen windows of Marchello's like a fist demanding entry. Steam rose from the industrial dishwasher, fogging the air with heat that felt suffocating in the cold restaurant. Aria Wells stood at the sink, her hand submerged in scalding water, scrubbing the last of the dinner plates. Her uniform was stained with something that might have been marinara sauce or might have been her own exhaustion made visible. The clock on the wall read 11:53 p.m. She had been working since 4 in the afternoon. 9 hours. No break. No tip jar that Derek Collins hadn't emptied into his own pocket. Voices rose from somewhere near the back storage room. Not the ordinary noise of closing. This was different. Harder. She recognized one voice immediately, Rocco, a man who came to the restaurant every other Thursday, always sat in the corner booth, always paid in cash, and always carried the kind of silence around him that made other customers nervous. The other voice belonged to someone she'd never heard before, speaking in tones of pure threat. Aria dried her hands on her uniform and moved toward the sound. The storage room door was propped open. In the space between the racks of wine bottles and boxes of imported pasta, she found Mr. Petrov. He was 73 years old, with trembling hands that had cleaned thousands of dishes in this kitchen, hands that had built a life from nothing after leaving Moscow in 1983. He stood backed against the wall now, his face the color of old paper. Rocco was massive, muscular in a way that suggested he spent his mornings doing things that required violence. His suit was charcoal grey and cost more than Aria's entire monthly rent. Beside him stood Nino, younger, sharper, with cold eyes that looked like they had never held a moment of kindness. Both men had the particular stillness of people trained to hurt without hesitation. "You owe the Castellano family $4,000, Rocco said, his voice like granite being dragged across concrete. "Mr. Castellano has been patient with you. That patience expired last month." Mr. Petrov's lips moved but no sound came out. "Tonight you pay," Nino continued, stepping closer, "or we take it from your granddaughter's college fund. The one she's been saving for at Northwestern. She's worked 3 jobs to get that money together, hasn't she? 16 years old, working 3 jobs." The old man made a sound like an animal caught in a trap. Aria didn't think. That was the thing she would replay 1,000 times in the days that followed. She didn't think, didn't calculate risk, didn't weigh the cost of what she was about to do against the brutal mathematics of her own survival. She simply moved. "Leave him alone." Both men turned. Rocco's hand drifted toward his jacket. Nino laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Aria stepped between them and Mr. Petrov, her voice steady despite the fact that her hands were shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists. "He's 73 years old. He busses tables for extra money because he loves his granddaughter. And you're threatening a child? You're going to destroy a girl's future because of $4,000? That's what makes you powerful. That's what you do." "Girl," Rocco said, and his hand was moving, pulling open his jacket to reveal something dark and deadly beneath. "Enough." The voice came from the darkness at the far end of the storage room, quiet and absolute, the kind of voice that stops time. A man emerged from the shadows, and the air itself seemed to recalibrate around him. Vincent Castellano was tall, 6'2", maybe 3, with broad shoulders that filled a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than a used car. His hair was dark, styled with the precision of someone who had never been uncertain about anything. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were dark like winter water, penetrating, holding depths that suggested he had seen things most people only experience in nightmares. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, a thin white line like someone had tried to cut away part of his soul and left a map of the attempt. He studied Aria for 5 full seconds. A delivery girl in a stained uniform, flour dusting her dark hair, fire burning in her eyes, protecting a man she barely knew. In that moment, Vincent Castellano looked at her the way a man looks at something precious that he thought had been lost forever. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" His voice held something like surprise. Aria lifted her chin. "Should I?" Something flickered across his face, recognition, or pain, or both. He turned to his men without breaking eye contact with Aria. "The debt is forgiven. Leave. Now." They obeyed with the immediate compliance of men who understood that disobedience carried costs too steep to calculate. Rocco's hand withdrew from his jacket. Nino's expression shifted to something unreadable. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only the fading sound of their footsteps on the tile floor. Vincent studied Aria for another moment. Then he walked back into the darkness of his private booth and sat down, returning to the red wine he had been drinking before the interruption. He did not look at her again. But she noticed his hand trembling as he raised the glass to his lips. Mr. Petrov stood in stunned silence. "Aria, what you just did." "Go home," she whispered. "Go home and call your granddaughter. Make sure she knows you love her." 3 blocks away, in a mansion that occupied an entire city block, there was a nursery on the 2nd floor that had not been entered in 15 years. The walls were painted pale yellow. A crib still stood in the corner, untouched, waiting for a child who would never sleep there. On the wall above the changing table, in the careful handwriting of a 6-year-old, were words painted in blue paint, "Lucia's room." Vincent's daughter had painted it herself, sounding out each letter, asking for help only on the R. She had died 8 weeks later, struck by a drunk driver while walking home from school. She was 7 years old and had never done anything in her life that would warrant such cruelty from the universe. Vincent had spent 15 years convinced that he would never feel anything again, that grief was something you endured like a scar, like a permanent remaking of who you were meant to be. That some wounds never closed, they only became part of your body's geography. What changed everything was a delivery girl with $200 to her name, standing between him and violence, unafraid. 2 weeks passed. The rain in November fell harder and more often, turning Chicago's streets into mirrors of gray sky and reflected neon. Aria worked her shifts at Marchello's, grateful that Derek Collins had not fired her in the aftermath of the storage room incident. She expected to be punished. Instead, there was only a careful silence, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. That silence broke on a Tuesday evening. Derek was waiting in the manager's office when she clocked in, his arms folded across his chest in a way that suggested he had practiced looking threatening in the mirror. Sophie Langford sat perched on his desk like a bird of prey surveying territory. She was 52, with the kind of beauty that comes from money and dermatologists, her face arranged into permanent disapproval. Her suit was cream-colored Chanel that probably cost more than Aria made in a month. "Aria," Sophie said, her voice soft as silk over steel. "We need to talk about your job performance." Aria's stomach dropped. She remained standing. "What about it?" "We've had complaints," Derek said, his jaw working like he was chewing something bitter. "Customers say you're unstable. Confrontational. One regular mentioned you were rude to his server." "That's not true," Aria said quietly. "I've never." Sophie raised one hand and Aria's words died. "We're letting you go. Effective immediately." The room tilted. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to buzz louder, as if the world was angry at her too. "You can't do this. I need this job. My son needs." 2 weeks of severance, Derek interrupted. "That's generous given the circumstances. You should consider yourself lucky." Sophie smiled. It was not a kind expression. "Be very grateful, Aria. We could have pressed charges for the incident in the storage room. That would have made finding employment difficult." "What incident?" Aria's voice shook. "All I did was ask them to leave a customer alone." Sophie stood, smoothing her jacket. "That's not the story that's being told. By morning, every restaurant owner in Chicago will have heard that you're unstable, that you provoke our customers, that you're a liability. You'll never work in this city again, not in food service, not in any industry that matters." She leaned close, and Aria smelled expensive perfume mixed with something cold. "You cost us money and reputation. This is what that costs you in return." 2 hours later, standing outside Marchello's with her belongings in a plastic bag, Aria walked through the November rain toward the bus stop. Her phone buzzed. It was her landlord. The message was brief and devastating: eviction notice served. 30 days. Lease violation. You have to go. There was no lease violation. Derek had called the landlord, had spoken in serious tones about problems with her character, and the landlord, who had been looking for an excuse to raise rent by converting her unit into a luxury space, had seized the opportunity. That night, Aria sat on the floor of her apartment with Oliver sleeping in the bedroom next door. She pulled out her wallet. Inside was a $20 bill, a 10, 3 ones, and 17 cents in change. $200 total. She had to make it last until. She stopped counting. The surgery was scheduled for January 4th, 48 days away. She had $200 and no job and an eviction notice and a child who needed a heart valve replacement that cost $22,000. The mathematics were not difficult. The mathematics were impossible. She didn't notice the envelope that had been slipped under her door until the next morning. Inside, wrapped in a single sheet of plain white paper, was $500 in cash. No note. No explanation. Just money, appearing like a gift from a ghost. She was terrified. She was also desperate enough to take it. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Dr. Moretti, the pediatric cardiologist. His voice was carefully professional, but there was something almost emotional underneath it. "Miss Wells, I have very good news. A donor has come forward. They've covered the entire cost of Oliver's surgery. He's been moved to the priority list. We can do the procedure on December 28th. 3 weeks from now. Is that acceptable?" Aria couldn't speak. There were no words large enough to hold what she felt. The money was real. The surgery was real. It was happening. But Derek and Sophie were not finished. 3 days before the surgery, Aria returned to the restaurant one final time. Not to work, she was unemployable now. But to beg. Pride was something poor people couldn't afford. She found Derek in the alley out back, where the trash bins overflowed with the waste of luxury. The rain had started again, soft and persistent, turning the concrete dark. "I'll do anything," Aria said, her voice breaking. "I'll work without pay. I'll work nights. I won't tell anyone about the wage theft. Just give me my job back. Please." Derek stepped toward her, and she could smell alcohol on his breath. "You should have kept quiet about the tips. You should have been grateful for what you got. But you couldn't let it go. You had to be a hero, didn't you?" Sophie appeared from the kitchen door, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, not Vincent's men, but muscle hired for this specific purpose. She was smiling. "We've made some calls," Sophie said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Every restaurant owner in this city knows your name now. Every hotel, every catering company, every retail position. We've told them you're unstable. That you steal. That you're dangerous around children." She stepped closer, and the rain slicked her designer suit with water that beaded and rolled away like tears. "You made me look weak, Aria." Nobody makes Sophie Langford look weak. They left her standing alone in the rain, shaking with rage and fear and the terrible knowledge that she was truly, completely trapped. Later that night, with Oliver sleeping and the rain thundering against the windows, Aria pulled out her phone. In the envelope with the cash had been a business card, torn and weathered. On it was a single phone number and the name Rocco. She didn't know who had sent it. She didn't care anymore about caution or safety. She dialed. A man answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for her to call. "Ms. Wells?" "Yes," she whispered. "I need help. I don't know who you are or why you sent me that money, but I need help, and I don't have anyone else to ask." There was a pause. In the background, she could hear the sound of a car engine, heavy and powerful. "Where are you right now?" "My apartment. 14th and Madison." "Stay there. Someone will arrive within the hour. Do not answer the door for anyone else. Only someone who says your son's name." The line went dead. Aria sat in the darkness of her living room, rain streaking the windows, and realized that her life had just split into 2 distinct moments, before and after this phone call. The November rain fell like bullets on the Chicago River, each drop hitting the black water with a sound like tiny explosions. Aria Wells stood on the bridge overlooking the churning darkness, her thin jacket soaked through, her hands gripping the wet railing so hard her knuckles had turned white. She had been standing here for 17 minutes. She had been counting. The wind came off the water and tore through her body like a blade wrapped in ice. Below, the current moved fast and dark, promising something that exhaustion and fear had made almost beautiful. An ending. No more double shifts. No more Derek Collins stealing her tips while she served pasta to people who could feed their families for a week on what they spent on wine. No more shelter cots where Oliver slept on nights when the eviction notices came. No more choosing between her son's medication and groceries. No more of this. She had $200 in her pocket. 200. Oliver needed surgery in 18 hours. The surgery had been paid for by someone she did not know and could not repay, a man named Rocco who had visited her apartment 3 days ago and left a check with her hand shaking so badly she could not hold it. But after the surgery, after the recovery, after the 6 months of physical therapy the doctors said he would need, she had nothing. No home. No job. No way to care for him. Her fingers loosened on the railing. Then her phone buzzed. The sound cut through the rain like something sharp. A text message. She pulled the phone from her jacket pocket with trembling hands. The message came from an unknown number, but she knew it was from the shelter nurse. She knew it was from Oliver. "Mommy, I drew you a picture for after my surgery. I love you." 7 words. That was all it took. Aria stood there in the November rain with those 7 words burning into her mind, and something shifted in her chest. Not healing. Not hope. Just a stubborn refusal to disappear. She would not leave him. She would not choose the dark water when he was waiting for her with a drawing and a heart that still believed in her. She stepped back from the edge. The rain continued to fall as she walked toward Marchello's, each step heavier than the last. She had made a decision in those 17 minutes on the bridge. She would confront Derek and Sophie one final time. She would record their confessions on her phone, capture their voices admitting to wage theft and threats. She would expose them to the authorities. It was reckless. It was desperate. It was all she had left. The back entrance to Marchello's was dark, the alley slick with rain and grease and the smell of discarded food. Through the rain-streaked window of the delivery door, she could see into the kitchen. And beyond it, in the private dining room, she saw him. A man she had seen only once before, the night he had defended Mr. Petrov. He sat alone at a corner booth, candlelight casting shadows across his face like he was something carved from stone. He wore a suit that cost more than her annual rent, and his hands rested on the table with the stillness of a predator at rest. She did not know his name. She did not know that his name was Vincent Castellano, or that he owned half the businesses in this city, or that the men who worked for him would walk into fire without hesitation. She was about to knock on the door when movement in the alley caught her eye. A man emerged from the shadows, dressed entirely in black, his face obscured. His right hand rose slowly, deliberately, and in that hand was a gun. The barrel turned toward the window, toward the booth where Vincent sat unaware. Toward the man who had shown her kindness when the world had shown her nothing but cruelty. Aria did not think. There was no moment where she weighed the consequences or calculated the risk. Her body moved like it was acting on an instinct older than reason. She ran. Her palm slammed against the delivery door and it swung open. She screamed into the rain, a sound like nothing human, a sound like her entire soul was trying to tear itself out of her chest. Gun! She threw herself forward, her body moving between the window and the booth, between the assassin and Vincent Castellano. The world slowed. She saw the assassin's finger tighten on the trigger. She saw Vincent's head turn in surprise. She saw the flash from the barrel as the shot cracked through the November night like lightning splitting a tree. The bullet meant for Vincent's chest found Aria instead. Pain exploded white-hot through her abdomen, a sensation so pure and devastating it consumed everything else. The air left her lungs. Her legs folded. She fell to the rain-slicked floor of Marchello's kitchen, her blood mixing with the water running across the tiles like a terrible river. The rain continued to fall through the open door, cold and relentless, soaking her face. Vincent moved like lightning. His hand went inside his jacket and came out with a gun, and before Aria's vision had even begun to blur, before the pain had evolved into something she could understand, before her body had fully registered what had happened, Vincent fired. One shot. The assassin crumpled in the alley like a puppet with its strings cut, and then Vincent was on his knees beside her, this man who ruled an empire through fear and violence and absolute control, rendered helpless by the sight of her blood. His hands moved to her wound, pressing against her abdomen with a desperation that seemed to crack something in his chest. His voice was different now, stripped of authority, trembling like a man who had suddenly realized he could lose something he did not know he valued. Stay with me. Eyes open. Stay with me. Aria's vision was swimming. She could barely feel her legs anymore. She looked at his face, at the intensity burning in his dark eyes, and she knew with absolute certainty that she did not know this man, that she had just thrown her life away for a stranger. Why did you do that? His voice cracked, You don't even know me. Why would you do that? Her own voice came out like air escaping from a punctured balloon, barely a whisper, shattered like glass. You helped that old man. Good people are rare. The sound of car doors slamming erupted from the street outside. 12 black SUVs had arrived, appearing from the darkness like they had materialized from nowhere. 12 men in black suits moved with the precision of soldiers, their movements synchronized, their purpose absolute. Rocco was first through the door, his face going white when he saw Aria bleeding on the floor. He did not ask questions. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest, moving toward the nearest SUV with a speed that suggested he had done this before. Vincent was already shouting, his voice transformed into something that cut through the rain and the chaos like iron. Mercy Hospital. Dr. Moretti. Tell him it is Vincent. Tell him I am on my way. And bring me Derek Collins and Sophie Langford. Alive. I want them alive. The convoy moved through the November night like a blade cutting through silk. Sirens wailed in the distance, but they never came close. 2 police cars that might have been in the way received a simple phone call, and they turned down other streets, leaving the way clear. Mercy Hospital's emergency entrance emptied of patients when the SUVs pulled up. A trauma team was waiting on the steps before the vehicles had even stopped moving. Vincent carried Aria from the car himself, his expensive coat stained with her blood, his face carved from stone except for his eyes, which burned like a man who had just been given a choice between heaven and hell and was willing to pay any price to choose correctly. She does not die, he said to the doctors, and it was not a request or even a prayer. It was a decree, a law, an absolute command issued by a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Do you understand me? She does not die. In the emergency room, as the surgeons moved with practiced efficiency to stop the bleeding and repair the damage, as blood packs were being hung from stands and monitors began to beep with Aria's vital signs, a 12-year-old boy named Oliver slept fitfully on a cot in Mercy Hospital's family shelter, dreaming of his mother's face. 42 minutes later, Derek Collins was dragged from his apartment bed by 4 men who moved with professional efficiency. He was still in his pajamas when they forced him into the back of a black SUV, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, his voice emerging in little panic gasps. What is this? What do you want? I haven't done anything. I haven't. The warehouse they brought him to was empty except for Vincent Castellano and the darkness and the single lamp overhead that cast everything into shadow. Derek Collins was thrown onto his knees on the concrete floor, and for the first time in his 38 years, he understood that he had made a mistake so profound that no amount of begging or bargaining would erase it. Vincent descended the warehouse stairs slowly, each footstep echoing off the walls like a judge's gavel. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and the cuffs were rolled up, revealing the gold watch that had belonged to his grandfather and the tattoos that marked him as something older and more dangerous than any law. You destroyed a woman who only wanted to feed her son, Vincent said, and his voice was empty of rage or cruelty. It was worse than rage. It was worse than cruelty. It was the voice of a man dispensing justice the way a surgeon dispenses medicine. You stole from the powerless because you are weak. Because taking from people with nothing made you feel like you were something more than what you are. Derek was crying now, mascara from yesterday's eyeliner running down his face in black rivers. He was babbling, his words tripping over each other, his body trembling like a wounded animal backed into a corner. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. She was nothing, just a waitress. She was nobody. I was just. You were just what? Vincent knelt until his face was inches from Derek's. Stealing? Threatening? Destroying someone's reputation so thoroughly that no one would hire her? That is what you were doing. And you did it because you thought she was nobody. Because you believed that people like her do not matter. Vincent stood and turned away, his silhouette framed against the single overhead light. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will arrive at Marchello's with warrants. Every stolen tip from every shift you worked. Every falsified time card. Every threat you made recorded in writing or on video. All of it has been documented and delivered to the FBI. Derek's face went white. Not red. Not flushed. White like the blood had drained from his skin entirely. You can't. You can't do this. I'll lose everything. I'll go to prison. 40 years federal prison, Vincent said, and his voice was final, absolute, like a sentence handed down from on high. But here is what you need to understand. Death would be too quick for what you did. Too easy. Too merciful. You will spend 40 years in a cell, thinking about the woman you tried to destroy. Thinking about the boy you almost orphaned. Thinking about the fact that someone who was nothing to you was everything to him. That will be your punishment. Derek collapsed onto the concrete floor, his body racked with sobs, and Vincent's men dragged him away to a secure location where federal agents would find him exactly where they were directed to look. Meanwhile, in the penthouse office of a high-rise downtown, Sophie Langford was being handed a tablet by her assistant. On the screen was the beginning of a video that was about to change everything. The video showed her voice, recorded 3 months ago, admitting to wage theft in explicit detail. It showed her approving the falsified time cards. It showed her ordering Derek to spread rumors about Aria Wells that would destroy her ability to find work. The video had been leaked to every major news outlet in Chicago simultaneously, timed with military precision. By 6 a.m., the story was the lead headline on every local news broadcast. By 7 a.m., it had gone national. By 8 a.m., Sophie Langford's face was plastered across television screens across the city, and the phones in the offices of every major news organization were ringing with reporters demanding comment. When she stepped out of her country club at noon, news cameras surrounded her like hungry wolves. Reporters screamed questions, their voices overlapping, their microphones thrust toward her like weapons. Mrs. Langford, is it true you stole over $400,000 in employee wages? Mrs. Langford, did you orchestrate a campaign to destroy a single mother's reputation? Mrs. Langford, what do you have to say to the families affected by your crimes? Sophie's face had transformed. The confidence that had sustained her through decades of cruelty had evaporated. Her hand shook. Her voice came out high and thin and desperate. I didn't. This is a misunderstanding. My lawyers will. The black SUVs with federal markings pulled up to the curb. 2 agents descended, their faces professional and without mercy. They did not read her rights harshly. They did not treat her with disrespect. They were simply efficient, handcuffing her in front of the cameras, placing her in the back of the vehicle, driving away while the news helicopters followed and the world watched. And in the hospital waiting room, Vincent Castellano sat in a chair that seemed too small for him, watching the news coverage on a mounted television, watching Sophie Langford's world collapse in real time. There was no satisfaction in his eyes. No triumph. Only exhaustion and the terrible knowledge that justice served does not heal wounds or bring back the dead or restore what has been stolen. The hospital room was all white. Walls, ceiling, sheets, the machines beside the bed, everything the color of surrender. Aria Wells opened her eyes to sunlight streaming through windows she did not remember, to pain radiating from her left shoulder like a blade wrapped in ice, to the sound of her own breathing, shallow and uncertain. A nurse appeared in the doorway, a woman with kind eyes and scrubs printed with small flowers. She checked the 4-line, adjusted something on the monitor, wrote notes without speaking. When she finally met Aria's gaze, her expression shifted into something soft, almost reverent. You're awake, the nurse said. Good. Dr. Moretti will want to see you. Aria's throat was sandpaper. What happened? The bullet missed your subclavian artery by 3 centimeters. Any less and you would not have survived the ambulance ride. You were lucky. Lucky. The word sat strange and heavy. Aria tried to remember, the kitchen at Marchello's, Derek's men moving like shadows, the elderly customer backing into the corner, her own body stepping forward before her mind caught up with the decision. The sound of the gunshot. Sharp. Final. Like a period at the end of a sentence. The nurse continued, you've been unconscious for 9 hours. Your son has been asking about you. He's in the waiting room with, she paused, choosing words carefully. With a man. He said to tell you he's taking care of the boy until you wake up. A man? Aria's eyes closed. She had only seen him once, in the shadows of his private booth, watching her with eyes like storm clouds gathering. Vincent Castellano. The name itself carried weight, a thing everyone in Chicago knew, but nobody spoke aloud unless they were very drunk or very stupid. Dr. Moretti arrived an hour later. He was tall, grey-haired, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades deciding between life and death. He explained the trajectory of the bullet with clinical precision, how it had entered cleanly, how the surgical team had worked for 8 hours to repair tissue damage, how she would need physical therapy, how she was profoundly, impossibly lucky. The medical bills alone would be significant, Dr. Moretti said carefully, reviewing her chart. However, it appears your care has been fully covered by a private arrangement. There will be no cost to you. Aria's hands trembled against the white sheets. Private arrangement. 3 words that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. 3 days later, when the pain had dulled to a persistent ache she could almost ignore, Rocco appeared in her doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that cost more than her monthly rent. His face was expressionless, but something in his eyes suggested he was used to delivering messages that made people nervous. "Boss wants to see you," he said. "When you're ready to walk." The mansion materialized from the November cold like something from a fever dream. Iron gates stood open, wrought iron twisted into patterns that resembled thorns. The ground stretched impossibly vast, manicured lawns giving way to gardens where late roses still bloomed. The house itself rose 3 stories, cream-colored brick and dark shutters, windows like watching eyes. Rocco drove her in silence. The radio played soft Italian music, something classical and minor key. Outside, the city gave way to tree-lined streets where old money lived quietly, where the very air seemed to cost more than it should. Vincent was waiting in his study when she entered. A fire burned in an ornate fireplace. Books lined the walls, leather-bound and aged. Behind an enormous desk of dark wood sat the man she had seen only in shadow. He stood when she entered. Vincent Castellano in the light was not what she expected. He was tall, yes, 6'2", maybe 3, with broad shoulders and the kind of bearing that suggested he had never once questioned his right to occupy space. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, the kind that made you understand why people feared him even before they heard the stories. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples, swept back from a face that was angular and severe. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, white against olive skin, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were the color of a storm, penetrating and ancient and infinitely sad. "You can sit," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Aria sat in the chair across from his desk. The leather was soft, expensive. Everything in this room was expensive. She was wearing borrowed clothes from the hospital, and she suddenly felt like something the wind had blown in, something transient and out of place. "Why am I here?" she asked. Vincent returned to his chair, steepled his fingers. "You took a bullet for someone you had no obligation to protect." "I did what anyone would do." "No." His voice was absolute. "You did what almost no one would do. You stood between my men and a helpless old man when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose." He paused. "You took a bullet meant for me." Aria's breath caught. She had not realized. In the chaos and pain, she had not understood that the shot was meant for anyone in particular, that there was a trajectory, a target, an intention behind the violence. Vincent continued, 3 days ago, the hospital informed me that you had no insurance. That your medical costs were $17,000 and climbing. That you have a son who needs surgery, heart surgery, within 10 days, a surgery costing $22,000, and that you have exactly $200 to your name. He opened a drawer, withdrew a paper. "This is the receipt from Dr. Moretti. Your care has been paid in full. The surgery for your son is scheduled for tomorrow morning at Chicago Memorial. Dr. Moretti will perform it personally. The cost has been covered." Aria stared at the paper without seeing it. The room tilted. Why? Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. Vincent rose and walked to the window. The November afternoon was grey and cold, the kind of day that made the world seem very small and very fragile. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, and there was something in it that sounded like sorrow running very deep. 15 years ago, I had a daughter. Her name was Emma. She was 7 years old, almost 8. She had a heart defect that no amount of money could fix, no amount of power could change. She died in her sleep, and I sat in that hospital for 3 hours afterward, not believing that the world was actually continuing to move. His hand pressed against the glass. There's a nursery upstairs in this house. I painted it myself, years before she was born. Yellow walls. A mobile with stars and moons. She wrote her name on the wall when she was learning to write, practicing her letters. Emma. In pencil, carefully formed, the way only a child could do it. I have not entered that room since the day she died. I could not bear it. Aria felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Vincent turned to face her. When I watched you step in front of my men, when I learned that your son was dying and you were drowning trying to save him, I saw something I had not seen in 15 years. I saw the kind of courage that my Emma would have had. The kind of love that transcends reason. He paused. I could not save my daughter. But I could save yours. Oliver had his surgery that morning. Aria was still in the hospital, her shoulder bandaged and bound, when Rocco brought her the news. The surgery went perfectly. 7 hours and 14 minutes. The valve was repaired. The defect was corrected. The doctor said he would be fine. He would live. When they wheeled Oliver past her room on his way to recovery, she saw his small face, peaceful in sedation, and something broke open inside her, something that had been locked shut since the day she learned he was sick. That night, unable to sleep, Aria sat in a chair by her window and watched the city lights blur through tears. She thought about gratitude and debt, about the terrible weight of owing someone everything. She thought about the man in the study, his voice cracking when he spoke his dead daughter's name. She thought about the nursery she had never seen, painted yellow, with Lemma written on the wall in a child's careful handwriting. When Rocco came the next morning with a fresh set of clothes and a message that Vincent wanted to see her again, Aria was ready. The study was the same. The fire burned. The books waited. Vincent stood near the window, and when she entered he turned, studying her with those storm-grey eyes. I cannot accept charity, Aria said immediately. Her voice was steadier now, though still trembling with exhaustion. I need to work off what I owe you. Every single dollar. Vincent's mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. You took a bullet for me. The debt is mine. Then let me work for it. Aria stepped closer, needing him to understand. Derek and Sophie made sure I'm unhireable in this city. I have no references. I have no future in any respectable restaurant. But you could give me a chance. She paused. Let me earn this. Let me stand as your equal, not as someone you saved. Vincent studied her for a long moment. The world seemed to pause, waiting for his decision. I own a restaurant chain, he said finally. Legitimate business. No family involvement. I'll make a call today. You'll start as a manager next week. The salary is $60,000 a year. Benefits include health insurance, dental, a college fund for your son. He paused. You'll pay me back nothing. You'll work for me because you're qualified, not because you owe me. Understood. Aria nodded, unable to speak. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book. Aria rebuilt her life on her own terms, not as a charity case, but as a woman with skills and courage and a future that belonged to her. The new apartment had 2 bedrooms. Oliver's room had posters of dinosaurs on the walls, a bookshelf filling with stories, a bed where he slept without fear. Her own room had a window that overlooked the Chicago skyline, and sometimes at night she stood there and marveled that this was her life now, that she was still standing, that everything had not collapsed. Vincent's protection continued from the shadows. Silent. Careful. Never invasive. 6 months after the shooting, spring came to Chicago like a forgiveness. The harsh November cold gave way to gentle rain, the kind that smelled like renewal, like second chances. Aria stood in a small cafe near the river, watching Oliver draw at the next table, his pencil moving across paper with the focused intensity of a child who had learned to trust that tomorrow would come. Vincent arrived precisely on time, wearing a coat of dark cashmere that probably cost more than her first year's salary at the new restaurant. He moved like a man accustomed to commanding rooms simply by entering them. But when he saw Oliver, something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability that made him look suddenly less like a powerful man and more like a person carrying unbearable weight. Aria gestured to the seat across from her. "You never asked for anything in return. 6 months of help and you never demanded repayment. I told you." His voice was quiet. "The debt was mine." Aria reached across the table, placed her hand over his. His skin was warm, his hand larger than hers but carefully still. "I know about the nursery. Rocco told me. He thought I should understand." Vincent stiffened, but did not pull away. "I lost my husband," Aria continued. "You lost your daughter. We both know what it means to carry weight alone." When Vincent spoke, his voice cracked like glass breaking. "Her name was Emma. I haven't said it out loud in 15 years. Say it now," Aria whispered. "She deserves to be remembered." Vincent's eyes flooded with tears. "Emma. Her name was Emma." Oliver looked up from his drawing then, shyness flickering across his small face. He walked over slowly, handed Vincent the picture he had been creating. It showed a little girl wearing a crown, labeled in careful letters, "Emma the Princess." Vincent stared at the picture, his shoulders shaking, tears streaming down his face. And for the first time in 15 years, the vault inside him cracked open completely. Aria pulled him into an embrace while Oliver hugged his leg, and Vincent, this man who ruled a city through fear, wept for the daughter he had lost and the family he had found. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible. Subscribe because tomorrow we're bringing you another story about people who choose love over fear, courage over comfort. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever helped a stranger when you had nothing to give? Your story matters. We'll see you in the next one.